change, bringing classrooms into focus, Santa Rita Union's instructional rounds story. I am your host, Kim White. I am a learning integration specialist here at Parsec Education, along with a few other members of our team here. And just a few things to note, we will record this webinar and also share out slides. So after today's session, we will email those out to everyone. And then also just to orient you, if you're not as familiar with Zoom, down at the bottom, you have a spot to react or share in the chat if you have questions or to cheer our speakers on. This is meant to be interactive, so feel free to raise a hand or write questions in the chat. But we're gonna go ahead and get started. We can go to the next slide, Miss Becky. Thank you. So today's speaker is Miss Becky Moore. I'm super excited to introduce her. She is the Assistant Superintendent of Education Services with Santa Rita Union School District. They are located in Salinas, California, which includes 6 schools. They have 4 elementaries, 2 middle schools, serving approximately 3,000 Salinas area students. And so welcome, Becky. We're excited to hear your instructional round story today.
All right. Well, thank you. I was excited to be able to share our story about instructional rounds. This was our pilot year. So I'm going to jump right in. I timed myself last night and I was at 19 minutes, so not a moment to spare for me. So instructional rounds in education is something that I had learned about as a teacher many years ago. And before I really talk about what we learned through instructional rounds, I want to start with why this work was important to me. So like many districts after COVID, getting back into classrooms consistently was a challenge. People got used to being very isolated and independent. And so over time, we gradually rebuilt our learning walk practices and added some intensity each year. And this past year was the year that I felt like it's time for us to get into some deeper instructional learning. And so, as I said, I had learned about instructional rounds as a teacher. Apparently, I stole the book from my previous district, but I'm sure that's okay. I saw that this is number 5 of 12. I purchased the companion book leading instructional rounds and learning how to facilitate it. And I spent last summer reading this, specifically on an Alaskan cruise with my husband and my mom. And my mom kept asking why I was working on vacation. And I kept saying, but this book is so good. It's going to be like life-changing for us. So I did want to show you my mom making fun of me here and saying, oh, yeah, it is a good book. Can I borrow it when you're done? She still has not borrowed it. But she was just saying the other day, a year ago, we were in Alaska and you were reading that workbook. I said, it was great, Mom. So before we get started into instructional rounds, I want to give you a little context for our schools. This is our big overall snapshot for our state testing data for 24-25. And all I'm going to say about it is we have a great opportunity for growth. That's what we have. Looking at our trend analysis, we can see that we had a little bit of a dip in 23-24 that we were able to recover in 24-25, but other than that, pretty stable. And so we're really trying to learn what can we do to shake this trend. And this is our multilingual learner state testing results, the LPAC. Again, we have 27% of our students moderately developed, 8% in the well-developed. So a lot of areas for growth, particularly in the domain of reading. Looking at our students, we are 92% Hispanic, 87% socioeconomically disadvantaged, 43% of our students are multilingual learners, 20% are experiencing homelessness, and 15% are students with disabilities. So a range of needs that we're working with. And then looking at the 4 schools that participated in rounds, these are our 2 middle schools, and both schools serve predominantly socioeconomically disadvantaged students, as our entire district does, but you can see that their instructional contexts are different. JG has more students with overlapping support needs, and GV has definitely a larger multilingual learner population. And then our 2 elementary schools here, Again, serving predominantly socioeconomically disadvantaged students. New Republic, and Heather is our principal of New Republic, she's here, serves a more balanced student population, but definitely has a higher population of students with special education needs. And Santa Rita has the highest concentration of multilingual learner students in our school district. So the instructional rounds framework, it has 7, oops, I'm jumping ahead. Let me talk about this part first. Oops, I skipped my notes. So with rounds, what I really was drawn to is that it's keeping us focused on the instructional core. And so we're not thinking about specific programs or personalities or preferences, but looking at the interaction between the student, the content, and what students are actually doing and saying. And so if we want to impact the outcomes for our students, we have to change one of those things, which is then going to influence the other 2. 4 of our 6 schools opted to participate this year. It was optional. Next year, all 6 will participate. And our teams consisted of the principal of each site, their coach. One of our school sites also has a literacy coach through a grant at that site. And then 2 of their site teacher leaders, so grade level reps or department representatives. And then district directors also participated. And that formed our it's district-wide rounds network. So every member of that team participated in all of the days in instructional rounds, visiting each other's school sites. What was important for our teachers to understand is that there was no evaluation involved in this. It was all about learning. So we weren't looking for individual teachers that needed fixing, but it was looking for patterns across classrooms that would help us strengthen our instruction across the district system-wide. So here, I'm not going to read these, but the instructional core is highlighted in both of the books that I showed at the beginning. And we're going to dig into a couple of them in some upcoming slides, but you can see these here and how it's really focused on gathering factual evidence about what's happening and then impacting either the teacher, the content, or the student. And these 7 principles really were the guides for all the work that we did. We would continue to come back to them if we started to stray, to really come back to centering the work. This is the timeline that we followed over the year. What's not listed here is in July, we had our principals back for their beginning of year leadership retreat and introduced instructional rounds, the problem of practice concept, and asked for volunteers. And in August and September, our 4 school sites who are participating began developing their problems of practice. We had 2 days of launch or an orientation for all network members. And then we began our visits in October, November, January, and February, and had a culminating event to reflect in April. So the problem of practice is critical in the process because it becomes the lens for all the work that follows. And so at one point I was asked, maybe more than one point, I was asked, why not develop a district-wide problem of practice? Because we have very similar problems throughout the district. But it was really important to me that the school sites owned their own problem of practice and were invested in wanting to investigate that problem and learn how to, what solutions they wanted to apply. And so they each did develop their own, and I'll show those in a moment. But it's just important to reemphasize that the problem of practice is not a program. It's not an initiative. It's not a compliance check. It's a problem that is developed by the principal, the coach, the teachers at the school site, and is vetted through the entire faculty at that school site to make sure that they're all in agreement that that was what they wanted to investigate. And then while writing these, we encountered some problems. and learned that we really needed to focus not so much on what adults are doing, but what students are doing and how do we influence what they're doing. So if the implementation works, what would we expect to see students doing, saying, writing, or producing? So here are the 4 problems of practice. And you'll notice they have very common themes because we have common issues as a school district. But while the wordings differed, we were all ultimately exploring how students make their thinking visible through discussion, writing, reasoning, and demonstration of understanding. Yeah. All right, then digging deep, this is our visit at Heather's site at New Republic in November. And each site followed this consistent process. So we would begin with a pre-observation meeting. The host site would share its problem of practice, relevant context, and I would pull in some of their demographic and academic data from Parsec to make sure that we were sharing that context as well. Then the teams visited classrooms in small groups. We typically had about 5 teams. And so at almost every site, we visited every classroom on the campus at least once and sometimes more than one time. And then after observations, we screened and sorted the evidence, looking for what students were actually doing and saying. And then from there, we identified and vetted patterns that appeared across the classrooms rather than focusing on isolated areas. And so here, excuse me, are some of our teachers and team, the network. And they are writing pieces of evidence that they captured one by one onto sticky notes so that those could then be sorted. And this took a lot of practice to be able to isolate that piece of evidence and not clump things, and also not to try and start sorting as they were writing, because we really wanted the whole process to be slow and deliberate. As the principal said, description before analysis, we really tried to stay true to that. And then following the patterns, each visiting group would make a prediction about if I were a student at, I think, John Gutierrez Middle School, I would be able to respond to DOK level questions and prompts, was one of those that I remember. And then we would come back for a half day the next day to finish the work. And so this shifted from observation to learning. So day 1 was focused on collecting evidence, identifying patterns. Day 2 was professional learning, and then recommendations for next level work. One of the things that I appreciated most when I was reading my really good book last summer is the focus on improving the capacity of the entire network. So not just focusing on the school site we're visiting itself, but then thinking about what professional learning am I gaining from this experience and what am I going to take back to apply at my own site. So every site generated questions, curiosities, and examples. An example that I wanted to share here is that when we were at Heather's site, part of her context that she shared was building shared understanding around their problem of practice and beginning to address it. Earlier in the year, before our rounds visit, she had shared an article with her teachers at a faculty meeting and did a protocol to read and discuss it. So for our professional learning portion of day 2 from 8:15 to 9 o'clock, Heather led that same activity with our network, because when they heard about it, they were curious and asked, will you share that with us too? And then that resulted in the network recommending at our next professional development day district-wide, can we do this with all of our teachers? Because this is really valuable. So we were able to scale learning from Heather's site to the network and then to the whole district. All right, and then after the rounds is where the most critical work probably occurs, because you have patterns. What are you going to do with them? And so I have 2 examples of how 2 of our schools did this. At New Republic, they had 9 pattern statements, and that was too much to do, to respond to all of those. And so they spent time narrowing and prioritizing. And so this is them at one of their faculty meetings, identifying this is a pattern statement we think is high priority. And now we're going to start to put together some frames for greater teacher clarity that we can apply to our classroom immediately. At Santa Rita, instead of prioritizing patterns, what they did is their leadership team of the principal, assistant principal, and coaches came together, explored minor shifts that teachers could make in their instruction, which would address some of their pattern statements, and presented those minor shifts to teachers. And then in a faculty meeting, grade levels decided which one that they were going to commit to try for 2 weeks, then apply those strategies and come back together to share how that worked. So again, from learning to immediate implementation. I wanted to share a couple of reels from our instructional rounds. Following every gathering, we had a reel that we shared with the network members. And this is from October, where the emphasis was really about, am I doing this right? Am I collecting evidence objectively? What am I looking for? Focusing on learning the process, compared to February, where the conversation had shifted. No longer talking primarily about the protocol, but they were talking about instruction, student learning, the valuable vertical articulation that they were experiencing and what they learned from one another. So it was really starting to shift the culture for the network. Some outcomes that I'm happy to share, because all of our problems of practice were really focused on language and expressing students' thoughts and ideas. I leaned into our English learner data, and we can see growth in this year's data, which I'm really excited about. We broke the stalemate there that we had in 24 and 25, and it echoed across all domains. There was growth in each place. This is looking specifically at New Republic's growth in listening and speaking, where they were focused. And this is this spring's data. And then Santa Rita also showed growth in all 4 domains for language. So that was really exciting for them. So the last thing I'm going to share are just some of the statements that were shared in our reel at the end of our instructional rounds year. And I want to say that I'm really excited for next year, where we will have all 6 of our sites participating. Next year, we'll have 2 networks. Each middle school will be partnered with the 2 elementary schools that feed into them, so that we'll continue the vertical articulation, and they'll be able to support each other and where their students are coming from and where their students are going. Right. That is what I've got for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky. I appreciate you so much sharing this story and just how you really brought forward instruction in your district and really impacting student learning. So thank you. I'd love to open it up now to discussion with all of our partners that have joined us. So whether you have questions, comments, if you're doing something similar, also our Parsekians can chime in. But I really want to open it up to discussion, to just share out ideas or again, pose questions. And feel free to just unmute or type in the chat, whichever you feel comfortable with. You have any questions or comments? If not, Heather, maybe you could share a little bit about how you felt about this happening at your site, maybe what you learned as well.
Yes, absolutely. It was it was a really eye-opening experience. We had already begun some of the work of identifying a problem of practice before Becky pitched it to us um, at our admin meeting at the beginning of the year. And so we had a basis that was tying into like a foundational point that was tying into what we needed with our SIPSA. And we had started to really bring in that shared leadership model where we were empowering our leadership teams. So when she brought that in, we realized that our problem of practice did not meet those expectations because we didn't know all the pieces about the instructional core or the 7 principles. So we really took that as a team and we did this distributive leadership where we would talk to our leadership team and be like, okay, here's our data, here's our guidelines, this is what we're doing. What is that going to look like? And so as a principal, my biggest takeaway is that it gave my leadership team really something to start leading around. And so with that problem of practice, they've been able to, they decide what it is that we're going to do. Like we give them, like this is our timeline, this is the amount of time we have, what is reasonable for us to accomplish, what is not. So it's really empowered our teachers as leaders, and then our teachers as instructors. We've seen a huge shift in instructional practice at New Republic over the last year. We've seen a big shift over many years, but I felt like this year, and Becky, tell me if I'm off, but we really saw like a sustainable shift, and people starting to embrace it and starting to see the evidence. And one thing we did was we prioritized giving the teachers time to work around their problem of practice. So our leadership meetings are, okay, this is where we are in our problem of practice. What do we need? Okay, here's the time that we have. Do we spend it in collaboration? Do we send it? We do a lot of time about common expectations around the problem of practice. And what's been phenomenal with not only empowering the leaders, but also the teachers, is that we have grade levels now who are identifying common expectations around our POP. And just in a year, our problem of practice has evolved. And so we actually have a different one for this upcoming year that we're going to be working on, which is about empowering the students now. My teachers feel empowered and now they're like, well, yeah, now that we're doing this, we need our kids to do this. So that's been a really great experience, and it's tied together our instructional culture, and we're talking about teaching and learning now. We're not talking about distractors. We're talking about what are the kids doing? How can we support them in doing this hard work?
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing. And actually, something you brought up, Mimi, I jotted down a couple questions. One was, I know you mentioned with the teachers, you had said like it's not evaluative, but how did you decide which classrooms you would walk and then ensuring those teachers felt comfortable having guests in their classrooms, especially if walks aren't common practice in a district?
I think we had built in some less formal walks the prior 2 years so that teachers understood there was an expectation that if we're visiting classrooms, all classrooms are fair game. But I think at almost all sites, if not all 4 of them, we visited every single classroom, unless sometimes like recesses or breaks get in the way of that happening. They'll disrupt a schedule, but I think we were pretty close to all classrooms at every site, and some classrooms more than once. So
Great. Thank you. Do we have any other questions or comments, thoughts? Yes, I see a hand.
So I have a question. So I like that or it sounds like you let the sites choose their problem of practice, but they all seem to be on the same vent, right? Of it. I'm wondering, like, I don't know, what did you do to get them there? I've been trying to do that with my different schools, and sometimes they go like way off in left field and I have to like bring them back. So what were like the strategies or what made it successful?
I think leaning into the book's description of a problem of practice and what components need to be there was foremost. Also, looking at the data from the school site. All of our school sites have many areas for improvement, which we recognize, and I know that's not our district alone. We had one of our middle schools was thinking about leaning more into math, and then thought about what that would look like when our network visited the school site and visited classrooms and the limited number of math teachers on a middle school campus with about 500 students. And so they decided instead on their own without my prompting to shift to really thinking more about content, how are students demonstrating content knowledge, which then led to back to language because of being able to express knowledge. But they were, I think, the only ones who had started somewhere that was not as focused on language. Everybody else is recognizing that reading is a big concern in our district. And without solid listening and speaking to support that, you're not going to get to that. Yeah. So it happened organically. And that was, yeah.
Yeah.
Can I add
Thank you, Laura, for that question.
Add to that. Add, Heather.
So the other part that we did in our launch was that we had to critique each other's problem of practices before we began. So everybody had been exposed. And we started with mine because mine already had like an iteration before. But we had to go through and not only lean into the book, but apply it to the actual problems that we had. So we worked with the ones we had, we wordsmithed them as a network, not only as a site team.
Thanks. I forgot about that.
It was good work, Becky.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Any other questions or comments or wanting clarity on any piece or how they have maybe implemented something similar? Okay, if not, I have another question. I was curious because you mentioned, Becky, that you vetted the problems of practice. I'm just curious how you went about that.
I looked at the criteria in the book, really making sure that we're not looking at a specific implementation of a program or practice, but making sure that when we were looking at that problem of practice in a classroom, we would be looking at what students were producing, because that's the main crux of it, right? What is that task that the students are doing, and how is that demonstrating whether we are meeting the needs of the students or confirming that, yes, this is a problem. They're not reading or writing or speaking or listening enough, whatever it was for that school site. So that was the lens that I was taking, was, will the evidence we gather for this problem be focused on the student task?
And then you were able to, and then you were able to provide feedback to those leaders or teams writing those problem of practice.
Right, yeah, one-on-one with the principal to say, I think we need to tweak this a little bit more, here's why, and then let them do the work with their teams.
And so then that's when it went to the whole school site. You mentioned like the faculty having input on it. So then that's when it went to them and they were able to look through it and then also add feedback. Okay.
Continuously through the year too, because a couple of them did evolve a little bit further right before their site visit. where we thought we had it, but then after a prior site visit realized, oh, if a problem of practice isn't specific enough, then
Yeah.
it's really hard to gather evidence around it.
That's great. I just love how that would give ownership to the sites of their problem of practice, everybody having a voice in it. That's wonderful.
Becky, I have a question about how you documented. Did you have templates that everybody used? Did they come up with their own formats? Did you just kind of use the thinking? Just share with me how you tracked progress and also documented the problems of practice.
So the problems of practice were written by the sites and submitted, so I had those. When we were visiting classrooms, we all just had we had journals that we used throughout the year during the orientation for notes, for reflections at each of our gatherings. And those are also where they captured the notes about what they saw in classrooms. We weren't using a template or a form or any kind of checklist because it needed to be really organic. And then as far as progress, the principals would leave well, at the end of the second day, the half day, I would meet for an hour with the site team that we had visited to talk about what are your next steps with your school site. We formally came back together in April, and that at that culminating event, each site took a turn inside the fishbowl, sharing what they had done with their problem of practice before and after instructional rounds, and what did their data show to support any growth or areas for continued focus.
Thank you.
Great question, Martha. Anyone else want to pose a question, comment, think through how maybe they are implementing something similar or would like to implement something similar?
Becky and Heather, I have a question, and I apologize because I came in late. So if you talked about this at the beginning, just say we talked about that, and I will go back and watch the video so that you're not having to repeat yourself. But I'm curious, anytime that I hear about talking about creating the problem of practice and really focusing in on it, did you guys do work to create or explore that two-part question? One, that through line between your LCAP, SIPSA's problem of practice so that you can see how that pulls through from all of those strategic plans. And then the second question is, how were you and what did that look like leveraging data to inform the problems of practice or SIPSA's or LCAPs, whatever it might be? And did you already talk about that? Because if you did, I'm sorry.
We didn't.
Okay.
I'm going to say this like from the really broad scale, and then if Heather wants to add, I'll let her add from the site perspective. Our SIPSAs are very tightly aligned to the LCAP. Each school has a goal for our major areas of focus: reading, math, and language, and ELD. And so naturally, anything with the language domains is going to tie into that. So that's the broad perspective. But Heather, if you want to talk about it more specifically.
Yes, I think the through lines are very important because teachers are always feeling like we're adding. So we spent a lot of time talking about how, because we talked, the LCAPs aligned with the SIPSA, our problem of practice, our first iteration, which gave us at least like a starting point. It wasn't what we ended with. It wasn't what we went through instructional rounds with, but it was, we presented our data, our state data to our leadership team in February or January of 2025. And we talked about like, we have to put things in for our SIPSA, right? This is an expectation. And I said, and we're not going to just create a document. I said, we're going to do something that we're actually going to do that's going to make the experience for our kids better and that's going to support our teachers. And so we developed that just like with our SIPSA, which aligned with LCAP. So it did have a very clear through line. And we're bringing it into those specific populations that are the ones that we were flagged with on the dashboard. So it was very closely tied together. And I leveraged the SIPSA development process to begin the practice process.
Yeah. So to paraphrase back what I'm hearing you say, and I think that this is I mean, so critical for leaders is that it sounds like the problem of practice is the way in which you're bringing those goals now down into the classroom, right? Like
Yes.
you have that overarching LCAP, then you have your SIPSA that's really tightly aligned so that you can see what it looks like that's site specific and site based with their data. And now your problem of practice is, and here's how we're going to reach this. This is the way in which we are going to move that needle for kids. I love that.
And that's where that shared leadership came in, where I mean, we knew, like my coach and my AP and myself, like we knew where our areas of need were. Like we can see it. We've been seeing it for years. And so by giving it to the teachers, they were able to, they did the data analysis, they found the areas of need. And now I said, I'm like, so what are we going to do? Because we have to do something. What are we going to do that's going to help our kids and are going to help our team?
Yeah.
And they really developed not only the problem of practice, it was all facilitated by our coach. It wasn't facilitated by admin. That was a really important piece. And then they developed an action plan based off of that problem of practice and that data analysis.
Yeah.
So really empowered them.
I love it.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. One other question I had, and then I'll be the one to stop asking. But you had mentioned, Becky, this was a pilot. So I'm curious, like, during the pilot year, what's something moving into next year you're going to continue doing that you felt like worked really well? And what's something you want to change or do differently? What did you learn from your pilot?
I think that each site visit, we got stronger. It's going to be interesting next year because one of our middle schools will be paired with the two elementaries who did not participate this year. And so the network learning curve there is most likely going to look a lot like this year's for the teams, where each time we get stronger, as opposed to the other network. I see Jeanette's here too, that Santa Rita and New Republic will be a part of, where all three schools in that network will have had the experience, assuming that most of the members stay the same. There could be some new members, but I think that really spending the time up front in practicing capturing evidence. We used videos in the launch. That was really important. And also then transferring those to the sticky notes. At our first site visit in October, we had to redo a lot of our evidence because we were trying to write pieces of evidence that were too broad, instead of, you know, the direct quote or the direct action or a picture of what the student was doing kind of thing. So that learning, I think I'll transfer more upfront with our networks next year, and especially with new members. The other thing is we used, for our evidence, we would assign someone the scripter, somebody was the capturer, and somebody was the counter. So the capturer, we tended to use our phones and take pictures of things, but then how did we transfer that to a sticky note? And so by the last visit, we said, you can use that if it's going to help trigger your memory, but you're going to have to draw it somehow or describe it somehow on a sticky note for a piece of evidence, because at the beginning, the first couple of site visits, we lost all of those because we didn't have a way to add them to our sticky note pieces of evidence. So that was a big learning. Sometimes the devil is in the details.
Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Any other questions or comments from any of our other guests or Parsekians here? Okay. Becky, do you mind clicking to that last slide? I just want to thank you again, and the other members of your district that joined us this morning. We really appreciate you sharing your instructional round story and just how you are moving students. Just a reminder, we have our next Parsec Partner Exchange on July 21st at 9 o'clock again. So we hope you all will join us. And if there's no other questions, just a reminder, we will send a recording and the slide deck out after. Shay, is there anything else I need to share before letting everyone go?
You got it, Kim. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Becky. We really do appreciate you being here and sharing your story.
Thanks for inviting
Thanks,
me.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.